Well, it's a delight to be back with you all. I was here before the pandemic, and all of us have survived so far. But it's great to be back. Last night we had a great time. Talked about anger, how to understand anger, how to process anger in a positive way. And then first hour this morning we talked about dealing with our failures, how to apologize effectively, and what forgiveness is, and how to choose forgiveness. And this hour I want to talk to you about the most important word in the English language. I say that love is the most important word because Jesus once said in John chapter 13, "This is the way that they will know that you are my disciples, by the way you love each other." He gave the non-Christian world the right to judge whether or not we're truly following him by the way we love each other. That's why I say it's the most important word in the English language. It's also the most confusing word in the English language because we use the word love in 1,000 ways. We say, for example, "I love hot dogs." Or in North Carolina, where I live, we say, "I love barbecue." In North Carolina, that's always pork barbecue. Then I hear people say, "I just love the mountains. Oh, I love the beach. I love my new car. Love my dog." And then we say to a special someone, "I love you." What's that supposed to mean? Hot dogs and barbecue. I'm not going to talk about 1,000 ways that we use the word love. I'm going to talk only about 3 ways that we use the word love, and I'm going to focus on the third of these. I want to start with what we typically call falling in love. I doubt that you've ever heard a lecture on falling in love. If you want to learn about falling in love in our culture, you listen to country music. They're falling in love or out of love, every other song. But I want to talk about it because I think it is important. I think it's sometimes fully misunderstood. This kind of love actually begins with a feeling. I call it the tingles. You meet someone, there's something about the way they look and the way they talk and the way they emote that just gives you a warm feeling inside. And you want to be with them again. And every time you get together, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And eventually it becomes an obsession. You literally cannot get them off your mind. You go to bed thinking about them, you wake up thinking about them, all day long you think about them. They are the most wonderful person you have ever met in your life. Now your mother can see their flaws, but you can't. Your mother will say, "Honey, have you considered they haven't had a steady job in 5 years?" And you'll say, "Mama, give them a break. They're just waiting for the right opportunity." You see, it literally is an obsession. Now, people have asked me if this kind of love is in the Bible, and it is. For example, this is in Judges, chapter 14, talking about Samson. And here's what it says. Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a young Philistine woman. And when he returned, he said to his father and mother, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me, for my wife." Isn't that a nice culture? You fall in love, your mom and dad go work it out. That's not our culture, okay? And his father and mother said, "Well, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people that you must go to a Philistine girl?" And Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She is the right one for me." He's in love. Yeah, it happens. And then the Song of Solomon. This is the book we don't read in church. But the Song of Solomon gives you a pretty clear picture of a man in love and a wife in love. Now here's a wife who's in love. Here's what she says. "My lover is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Line up 10,000 men and he'll stand out above all of them." That's the way you feel when you're in love. "His head is purest gold, his hair is wavy and black as a raven." This is Song of Solomon chapter 4. And she goes on to describe his lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of gold. And she ends up saying, he is altogether lovely. This is my lover. No flaw in this guy. And that was chapter 5, I'm sorry, this is chapter 4. And here's a man in love. Here's the way he talks. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes are like doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats. That's pretty contemporary. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the water. Each one has its own twin. I guess she had braces when she was younger. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your temples behind your veil are like the halves of a pomegranate. And he goes on and on and on and on. And he ends up saying, all beautiful you are, my darling. There is no flaw in you. That's the way you feel what you feel when you fall in love. I think that's what Adam felt when he saw Eve. That's just my opinion. I think he felt exactly like that. So yeah, this is a human phenomena, and it plays a significant role in our lives. It's typically what draws us together long enough to decide whether we're going to get married. But here's one of the problems, and I wish people had told me this, but they didn't. The average lifespan of the obsession is 2 years, and we come down off the high. Now, let's be glad that we do come down off the high. Because if we didn't, you'd have to close down business, industry, education, church. You can't get much done when you're in love. But see, I was always told if you got the real thing, it's going to last forever. And my wife and I dated 2 years before we got married. And I came down pretty soon after the honeymoon. And everything my mother had told me about her was true. And I'm sure what her mother told her about me was true. And our differences emerged, and we ended up arguing with each other. And before long, not only did I not have those euphoric feelings, I had negative feelings toward her. Because in my mind, she wasn't doing right. And I didn't know, I was shocked. And what compounded the problem for me, 2 weeks after we got married, I enrolled in seminary to study to be a pastor. And here I am studying to be a pastor, and I'm miserable in my marriage. And I've lost all these positive feelings, and now I have negative feelings toward her. And I'm thinking, man, I don't know how this is ever going to work out. And see, here's what happens with a lot of couples at that stage, because I've spent my whole life working with couples who've gone through that kind of stuff. But here's what happens many times. One of them will get the tingles for somebody else. See, things aren't going well in the home. All we're doing is arguing with each other or just staying away from each other, just living like roommates. And so he gets up one morning and goes to work and does what he does every morning. He went to get his coffee. But that morning at the coffee pot, a lady walked up to him and said, "Good morning." The kindest words he's heard in months. Good morning. 8:30 in the morning, and her hair is combed. And she smells good. And he has this little tingle. And about 10:30, he sees her going for coffee, and he gets thirsty. Yeah, are you new around here? Oh, where are you from? Oh, you know my friend, he used to work over there, a little coffee pot conversation. And then he arranges for a few more coffee pot rendezvous over the next few weeks. And if he thinks that she might be feeling what he's feeling, he will say to her, "How about lunch someday?" And typically on the first lunch, he will tell her what it's like at his house, just so she knows where he's coming from, married but unhappy. And the second lunch, she tells him her story. And then they have lunches together. And then one day he says, "How about having dinner together?" And if she agrees, he will take her to a nice restaurant. I mean, one that has fresh flowers and candles on every table. And many times after that first dinner, They have a little after-dinner rendezvous. And a few more dinners and a few more rendezvous, and he's saying to himself, oh man, I don't want to hurt my kids. And then he's saying, but a man can't live like this forever. And then he says, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And so he tells his wife that he's through. And he moves out. But you see, I can almost guarantee you nobody told him that in 2 years he will come down off the high over here too. You see, divorce rates in second marriages is higher than the divorce rate in first marriages. And the divorce rate in third marriages is even higher. The answer is not running. The answer is learning how to love the person to whom you're now married. Why do I share this? Because I believe that in our culture there are many, many, many people who have allowed the tingles to pull them out of a relationship into another relationship where things could have worked out here if they had learned how to keep love alive in a relationship after you come down off the high. Now look, I'm not here to condemn anyone. I'm sure in a group this size we have people that have been married 2 times, maybe 3 times, or maybe even more. But listen, we are where we are. And what I want to share today, I hope is going to help you. If you're married, it's going to help you in the marriage you're now in to make it what you wanted it to be when you first fell in love. A second way that we use the word love is not nearly as exciting, but really far more important, and that is love as an attitude. Now that doesn't do much for you, does it? Love as a way of thinking. For example, in the Bible, in Ephesians 5:25, when it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, do you think he's talking about the tingles? Husband, get the tingles for your wife like Christ has the tingles. I don't think so. He's talking about an attitude. Remember in Philippians chapter 2 when it says, let this attitude be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who though he was God, he became a man. And as a man, when he got on level ground with us, he stepped down even further to death on a cross. Let this attitude be in you. It's the attitude that is, I want to enrich your life. The husband's commanded to have an attitude. I'm in this relationship to enrich your life, to help you become the person that God wants you to become. It's a way of thinking. And you see, we choose our attitude. We don't choose to fall in love. You don't get up one morning and say, I think I'll fall in love with somebody today. No. It just, you don't choose that. It just hits you. But every single day we choose our attitude. And the attitude affects our behavior. If I have the attitude of, I want to enrich your life, then I'll find ways to do that. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about this kind of love because we preach this. We preach this a lot. Love your neighbor. Look out for your neighbor. Even love your enemy, Jesus said. Have an attitude of trying to enrich the life of your enemy. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this kind of love, but it is important. But I want to talk about it. I want to focus on the third kind of love. And it's one we don't talk about much in church. And that is love as an emotional need. Almost everyone agrees that one of our deepest emotional needs as humans is the need to feel loved by the significant people in your life. And if you're married, the person you would most like to love you is your spouse. And your children, one of their deepest needs is to feel loved by the parents. You see, with parents, I like to say, the question is not, do you love your children? We tend to love our children by nature. The question is, do your children feel loved? He's 13 years old. He's sitting in my office. He's run away from home. And he says to me, my parents don't love me. I know his parents. I know they love him. The problem is they've never learned how to communicate love in a way that he feels loved. So I want to talk about how do we meet the emotional need for love in a marriage after we come down off the high. and how do we effectively love our children. Now, the difficulty in doing this is that we have assumed that what makes one person feel loved will make another person feel loved. But that's a false assumption. Never forget the day I first encountered this in my office many years ago. A couple came in, I'd never met them. I found out later they'd been married to each other for 30 years. They sat down and the wife started talking immediately, and she said, Dr. Chapman, let me just tell you a little bit about us before we start. She said, we don't argue. We don't believe in arguing. And she said, we don't have any money problems. She said, I was reading an article that said money's the biggest problem in marriage. She said, not for us. And she went on with 2 or 3 more positive things, and I was beginning to ask myself, did they come in here to tell me what a good marriage they have? And then she started crying. And she said, but Dr. Chapman, the problem is, I just don't feel any love coming from him. We're like roommates living in the same house. He does his thing, I do my thing, and there's nothing going on between us. And I just feel empty inside. And I don't know how long I can go on like this. Well, when she got through, I looked over at her husband, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. She sits there and tells you what she's been telling me. She doesn't feel loved. He said, I don't know what else to do. I said, well, what do you do to show your love to her? He said, well, I get home from work before she does, so I start the evening meal. And he said, some nights I have it ready when she gets home. If not, he said, she'll help me, and then we eat. And said, after we eat, he said, I wash the dishes. And he said, every Thursday night I vacuum the floor. And every Saturday I wash the car and I mow the grass and I help her with the laundry. And he went on. I was beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? I mean, it sounded to me like he was doing everything. And he said, I do all of that. And she sits there and says she doesn't feel loved. He said, I don't know what else to do. Well, I looked back at his wife and she started crying again. And she said, Dr. Chapman, he's right. He's a hard-working man. She said, but we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. He's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes, vacuuming the... You understand what's going on? A sincere husband who is doing everything he knows to do to show his wife that he loves her, and a wife who doesn't get it. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over in my office. And I knew there had to be a pattern to what I was hearing, but I had no idea what it was. So eventually I took time to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and asked myself the question, when someone sat in my office and said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. And I started using that in my counseling. If you want her to feel loved, you've got to learn to express love in her language. And if you want him to feel loved, you've got to express love in his language. And I would help couples discover their love language, challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. I mean, the whole climate's different now. And then I started using it in small groups of couples, just teaching couples. And the same thing would happen. And eventually I thought, you know, if I could put this concept in a book and write it in the language of the common person, leave out all the psychological jargon, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. Little did I know that that book would now has now sold over 20 million copies and been translated in over 50 languages around the world. People say to me, Gary, how do you account for that? And I say the short answer is God. And the long answer is God. That's all I know. But I think what has happened on the human level is couples have read the book, the lights came on, and they realized how they had missed each other. And then they took the quiz, and they learned each other's language, and they began to speak it. And the love tank began to fill up, and the whole marriage was reborn. And then the same thing happened when I wrote the 5 love languages of children. I just took the same 5 languages to children and wrote that book for parents. Every child has a primary love language. And if you don't speak their primary love language, they won't feel loved even though you're speaking some of the other languages. So I want to share these with you briefly. Many of you have read the book, but I want to get them back on the front burner, okay? And incidentally, every one of these is found in the Bible. Anything you discover, I said this last night, anything you discover in social research, it'll be found in the Bible. It'll never contradict the Bible. So here, let me just run through these. First is words of affirmation. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Love edifies. Love builds up. So one way to express love is to give words that build up the other person. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you, and to children, you're giving words of affirmation. I like what you did. You did really well on that. It's just looking for things that you can honestly, genuinely affirm. You know, there's an ancient Hebrew proverb, I think it's chapter 18 and verse 21, that says, life and death are found in the tongue. You can kill people by the way you talk to them. In fact, that's what we're doing in our culture today. We're killing each other with words. We're trying to kill each other. You can kill people by the way you talk to them, or you can give them life. So words of affirmation is one of the ways that we express love to the other person. Now, I had a lady some time ago who said to me, she said, Dr. Chapman, I hear you, and I know it would be good if I could give my husband some positive words. She said, but to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about the man. And I said, well, does he ever take a shower? She said, well, yes. I said, well, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there. I said, there are men who don't. And just say, honey, I appreciate you taking a shower. Yeah. See? I mean, I've never met a man you couldn't find something good to say about him. Never met a woman you couldn't find something good to say. You see, we tend to focus on the negative things about them, and we neglect the fact that they're doing some things good. So, words of affirmation. A second love language is gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. My academic background before I studied counseling and theology was anthropology, cultural anthropology. I did an undergrad and a master's. We've never discovered a culture anywhere in the world where gift giving is not an expression of love. You know, the verse I quoted earlier, Ephesians 5:25, when it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. In that illustration, Christ himself was the gift. James chapter 1 and verse 17 says of God, all good gifts come down from the Father of lights. God is a gift-giving God. The greatest thing he ever gave us was Jesus and what he did for us on the cross and the forgiveness of our sins and eternal life. Whew, man, you can't buy that. And so it's universal to give gifts. Now, the gift doesn't have to be expensive. Haven't we always said it's the thought that counts? But I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. You know, guys, you can get flowers free in the spring and summer. Just go out in your backyard and pick one. That's what your kids do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? Yeah, the kid sees it, they're fascinated, they just bring it to mama. Now, if you don't have any flowers in your backyard, check out your neighbor's yard. Don't steal them, but you say to your neighbor, you know, I have just admired this flower here, and if you're open to it, I'd like to give you $5 and buy that for my wife. I'll guarantee you they'll give it to you. I don't want your money. You can have it, man. It didn't cost you a penny. Or you can go to a funeral. I did that not long ago. I was out at the cemetery and the service was over and the family was leaving. There was flowers on the casket. And as the family was leaving, some of them were pulling out roses, and One of them said to me, "Dr. Chapman, would you like to have a rose?" I said, "I certainly would, thank you." Took that thing home, gave it to my wife. I told her where I got it. She still liked it. You can pick up a stone in a city parking lot and take it home and give it to an 8-year-old boy and say, "Hey, man, I found this thing today, and I thought about you. Look at the colors in here, man. I want you to have this." If gifts is his love language, you'll find that stone in his dresser drawer when he's 23, and he'll remember the day you gave it to him. Powerful. Gifts. A third love language is acts of service, doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. 1 John chapter 3, verse 18. Love not only in words, but in deeds. Do something to show your love. Remember the old saying, actions speak louder than words. If this is their love language, actions will speak louder than words. I remember when I was married in those early days, before I came down off the high, I gave my wife words of affirmation because that's my language. I gave her words of affirmation. I told her how nice she looked, how much I appreciated what she did. I told her probably a dozen times a day, "I love you, honey. I am so glad I married you. I love you, love you, love you." And one night she said to me, "You know, you keep on saying I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you don't ever volunteer to do the dishes. You don't ever volunteer to vacuum the floor. You don't ever volunteer to clean the toilet." And I didn't say this, but I'm thinking this. "Woman, my mama did that. What are you talking about?" Yeah. We say we bring our history with us. And I said, "Well, I didn't realize you wanted me to do that. Because, see, it never crossed my mind because my mama did it. It didn't come to my mind." But I said, "Well, honey, I can do that." And I said, "Now, on the toilet, I don't know how you clean toilets." And she said, "Well, I can teach you." So I started washing the dishes and cleaning the toilet and vacuuming, and she started giving me words of affirmation. And so I didn't get those early on. I guess she didn't think there's anything worthy to say about me, you know. And I didn't know anything about love languages, but looking back on that, she was telling me her love language was acts of service. And what I was giving her was words of affirmation. I was just doing what came natural for me to do. So see how powerful this is and how it can change lives? Acts of service. And this is such things as washing dishes and vacuuming floors and cleaning toilets and washing cars and mowing grass and walking the dog and changing the baby's diaper. Woo, that's a big one. Anything that you know the person would like for you to do. Now with children, we're forced to speak this language the day they're born because they can do nothing. We do everything for them. We put the food in, take the food out, you know. But later on, we're teaching them how to do things for themselves. And that takes even more time. That's a greater act of service. Teaching a child how to cook a meal is far more important than cooking a meal for them. Our granddaughter at 14 years of age could cook a full meal because her father taught she wanted to learn how to cook. He taught her how to cook. So, acts of service. For some people, this is their love language. And then, number 4 is quality time. Giving the other person your undivided attention. Mark chapter 3, verse 14 says of Jesus, he ordained 12. We call them the 12 disciples. Now listen, that he might be with them. Jesus preached to multitudes. He gave quality time to 12 men. Now, in a marriage, I'm not talking about sitting on the couch watching television together. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about the TV is off, the computer is down, we're not answering our phone, we're looking at each other and listening and talking to each other. Undivided attention. Now, to give this language and speak this language to a child, you have to go to where the child is because they can't come to where you are. So if they're little and they're crawling on the floor and you want to give them quality time, you get on the floor and let them crawl all over you. They have your full attention. Or you're sitting down with them as they get a little older with a book, and you're reading a book to them, and they have your full attention reading that book. And later you're playing in the sandbox and right on down the line. And we do fairly well at this when they're little, but when they get to be teenagers, we don't always want to do what they do. I remember when our son got into Buddy Holly. Anybody here old enough to remember Buddy Holly? He got into Buddy Holly. When he got into Buddy Holly, I got into Buddy Holly. Man, I read the lyrics to his songs. I said, Derek, I like this one, man. Listen to this. And one day I said to him, I said, you know, Derek, I got to go to Fort Worth, Texas to speak. Why don't you go with me, man? And when I get through speaking, you and I will drive out to Lubbock, and we will discover Buddy's hometown. Oh, Dad, I'd love to do that. I had no idea how far it was from Fort Worth to Lubbock. Woo! It's a long ride and not much out there but tumbleweeds and railroad tracks. But we got there, man, we went to the Chamber of Commerce. They gave us 3 pages on Buddy Holly. We went to the house where he was born. Actually, the house was gone, but I took a picture of my son on the lot where Buddy Holly's house used to be. And then we went to every school he went to the church where he went to where they played his first records. Man, we did the whole thing. And then all the way back, talked about Buddy Holly. Wonder what had happened if Buddy hadn't got killed in that plane crash. And wonder if Buddy really was a Christian, because the youth director at the church said he was a Christian. I said, Derek, we might see him in heaven. Woo! Now, folks, can I be honest? I didn't care about Buddy Holly. He was already dead, okay? But I cared a whole lot about my son. Are you with me? I talked to him just this week. He lives in Austin, Texas, my son, married now and grown and all. And he just started reflecting on all the things we had done together through the years, and how we went to Oxford and took a class together on C.S. Lewis. Man, you know, just all these memories of quality time with the kids. So quality time, given your undivided attention. And then just throw this in to parents. We have children at home. If you're talking to your child one-on-one, they have your full attention. Your telephone rings, and you answer that cell phone. You know what you've just communicated? Somebody out there is more important than you. Folks, let it go to voicemail. Give the child your full attention, especially if their love language is quality time. But for every child, they deserve that full attention. Now, I understand if you're a medical doctor or you're an emergency person, you have to answer. I understand that, but just tell the child, honey, this is an emergency. I got to take it, but stay right here. I want to finish our conversation, okay? And then, oh, man. I guess I must have touched this thing while I was talking. But the last one's physical touch. Physical touch. Mark chapter 10, verses 13 through 16. Jesus is preaching to the multitudes, and people start bringing their children to Jesus. And the disciples rebuke them. It says clearly, the disciples said, this is for adults. And Jesus said, bring the little children to me, for of such is the kingdom of God. And the next verse says he put his hands on them and blessed them. In fact, if you follow Jesus through his lifetime, he's always touching people. He's always touching people. Physical touch. Now, in a marriage, this is such things as holding hands and kissing and embracing and the whole sexual part of the marriage, and arm around the shoulder. And driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, or sitting around the house, they walk by and you trip them. I'm kidding. Don't trip your spouse. Now, here is what was already on the screen, and that is that each of us has a primary love language. Adults, children, married, single, each of us has a primary love language. And you can discover a child's love language by the time they're 4 years old by simply observing their behavior. How do they respond to you and other people? My son's love language is physical touch. When he was that age, when I came home from work, he'd run to the door, grab my leg, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. Our daughter at that age would say, Daddy, come to my room, I want to show you something. She wanting quality time. Just observe their behavior. It's there very early. Almost never does a husband and wife have the same love language. It does happen, but not very often. But even if they have the same love language, they will likely have a different dialect of that language. A wife said to me recently, she said, Gary, my husband and I have the same love language. I said, wonderful. I said, what is it? She said, acts of service. But, she said, the things I want him to do for me that make me feel loved are different from the things he wants me to do for him to make him feel loved. You understand? Same language, just different dialects. And by nature, we speak our own language. That's precisely what I was doing before I knew anything about love languages. I was just speaking my language to my wife, but it wasn't connecting with her because that was not her language. So the key is to learn to speak the love language of the other person. Now, how do you discover, let's take marriage. How do you discover your spouse's love language? Let me give you 3 informal ways. Number 1, observe their behavior. How do they respond typically to other people and to you? If your spouse is always giving other people encouraging words, that's probably what they want. That's probably their language. If you're married to a wife who likes to have lunch with her friend and spend an hour and a half or 3 hours having lunch and talking together, you can pretty well assume quality time is her love language. So just observe, how they express love to other people. And then, secondly, what do they complain about most often? The complaint reveals the love language. See, my wife was complaining about what I wasn't doing. The complaint reveals the love language. If your spouse says to you, I just feel like we don't ever have any time together anymore, they're complaining about quality time. See, by nature, we get defensive. If a wife says that to a husband, we don't spend any time together, the husband says, what do you mean? We went to dinner Thursday night. What you talking about? See, we get defensive. But they're really giving you valuable information. Their complaint reveals the love language. For example, a mother said to me recently, she said, Dr. Chapman, my 6-year-old son said to me, we don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came. He used to have quality time with his mother at the park, her full attention at the park. Now the baby's here, he's not getting it, and he's complaining about it. So what do they complain about? And thirdly, what do they request of you most often? What do they request of you most often? For example, my daughter in the teenage years, her request that came most often was, Dad, can we take a walk after dinner? She wanted my undivided attention as we took a walk together. My son would never walk with me. He said, walking is dumb. You're not going anywhere. Going somewhere, drive. His request for me most often was, Dad, can we play basketball after dinner? And the way we played basketball in the backyard, it was physical. So you put those 3 things together, you can pretty much figure out your love language. Now, there's also online a free quiz at 5lovelanguages.com. The number 5, 5lovelanguages.com. There's a free quiz for married couples. There's a quiz for single adults. There's a quiz for teenagers. And there's also questions there for a younger child than that. And so you go there and take that free quiz, and it will tell you your primary, your secondary, and right on down the line. They told me the other day, my publisher handles that website, they said over 80 million people have taken that quiz, that free quiz. And I said to them, you guys should have been charging $1 a piece, But I like my publisher. They said, no, we're not into getting money out of that. We just want to help people get it, and I really, really appreciate that. So, incidentally, you can find all of my books at that website. The book I talked about last night on anger, you can find the love languages of children and teenagers, and special editions on how this applies in a blended family, how this applies with a special needs child, how it applies with a patient who has dementia. I mean, we're just applying it in different areas, trying to help people keep love alive in various relationships. So, the challenge is, of course, that once we learn each other's love language, husband and wife, love the children's love language. Now, please hear me with children. I am not saying you only speak their primary language. You give heavy doses of their primary language, but you also teach them the other four. We want the child to learn how to receive love and give love in all five languages. That's the healthiest adult. Most of us did not receive all five growing up. And we have to, but here's the good news. We can learn to speak any of these once we become adults, even if we didn't learn them when we were children. Okay? All right. Well, let me close there. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing a song. And this song really gets to the heart of what I'm talking about. It's the idea of let me be a servant. Let me be a servant. You see, remember I talked about attitude? So you're not going to do this if you don't have an attitude of wanting to enrich your spouse. In fact, I had a man say to me, Dr. Chapman, I read your book. My wife and I took the quiz, and she told me her love language is acts of service. But I'll tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and my vacuuming floors for her to feel love, she can forget that. And I said to him, that's your choice. Love is a choice. You see, his attitude was, I'm going to do what I want to do. If he had an attitude of service, an attitude of love, I want to enrich your life, he would jump at the chance to wash dishes and vacuum floors. That's why the attitude thing is so important in this whole thing. All right, would you pray with me? And then the group's going to come and sing a closing song for us. Our Father, thank you for your word that speaks so clearly to our lives. Thank you for your great love for us in sending Christ to die for us. We would not be here today if that had not happened. Thank you that every single day you pour out, you speak all these love languages to us. And I pray, Father, for every one of us that we will ask ourselves how this might help us in our own relationships, in marriage, in parenting, in friendships. And I pray, Father, that the world will be able to see that we're Christians by the way we love people. Give us a heart that every single day has the attitude, I want to enrich the lives of every person I encounter today. And so, Father, by your Spirit, work in our hearts that we will indeed become lovers. I pray this for your glory. I pray this for our good. In the name of Christ. Amen.